This is Dr. Charles Parker, and you're listening to CoreBrain Journal. It's a place where I connect both fresh discoveries and interesting different perspectives from advanced mind science with the realities of real people and everyday life down on Main Street.
Well, welcome aboard, folks. Dr. Charles Parker here at CoreBrain Journal for yet another really interesting guest. And we're going to put the mind, body, spirit together with a board-certified internal medicine physician, if you can get that. She is an MD. Her name is Sandra DaltonSmith. She's an author, speaker, and board-certified internal medicine physician, as I just said. Sandra, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let me tell you a little bit about her in just a minute. But before we begin, I'm just going to say a couple quick words from our sponsor. And that is CoreBrain Journal is sponsored by Great Plains Laboratory. You folks know how interested we are in data. They are international leaders in biomedical testing for factors in brain health, including metabolism, nutrition, food allergies, exposure to environmental toxins, and much more. As both scientific and educational global thought leaders, they provide the most comprehensive set of hard data measurement tools for real biomedical answers beyond guesswork. And they also provide trainings, webinars for both the public and medical professionals on how to use the data that they provide effectively. Check out their website for references and testing details, and do take note of this one. This week, you can win a complimentary organic acid test. I don't know why I said that. I use it all the time. Organic acids test. It's a comprehensive metabolic test with 75 specific markers. Everything from yeast and candida all the way down to vitamin C, neurotransmitters, and a variety of mitochondrial activities that have to do with energy. Very comprehensive. Enter to win a free test at greatplainslaboratory.com/CBJ. CBJ in lowercase, CoreBrain Journal. Why not? It should be easy. So then let's talk a little more about Dr. Dalton-Smith. She has an active medical practice in Alabama near the Birmingham area. She received her BS in biochemistry at the University of Georgia and graduated with honors from Meharry Medical College in Nashville. She has been an adjunct faculty member at Baker College and Davenport University in Michigan and teaches courses on health, nutrition, and disease progression. Dr. Dalton-Smith is a national and international media resource on the mind, body, and spirit connections, and a top 100 medical expert in good housekeeping doctor's secrets. She's been featured in many media outlets, including Women's Day, Red Book, First for Women, MSNBC, and Prevention Magazine, one of my old favorite magazines. I subscribed to it for years. She is the author of Set Free to Live and another one, Come Empty, which is the winner of a Golden Scroll Nonfiction Book of the Year and a 2016 Illumination Award gold medalist as well. Her newest book is Sacred Rest. Get that, folks. Sacred Rest. Recover your life, renew your energy, and restore your sanity. We could all use a little bit of that. And she's going to be talking about sacred rest. But before we get started, let's go ahead, Sandra, and talk a little bit about, yes, you are a medical person, but there are not a lot of medical people that have dived as deeply as you have into all these various connections. So let's talk about how you went down that path. What led you down that path?
Well, honestly, I think my biochemistry background has a bit to play with it. I tend to like to go to the heart of things and try to see not just kind of what's happening on the surface, but what's going on beneath it all. And I just had so many patients that were coming in with the same complaint. I'm tired all the time. And I started off with the thought, well, maybe they're sleep deprived. They just need more sleep. And so many of them would come back and say, but I'm in the bed 7-8 hours a night sleeping, but I'm still tired all the time. And so it started really making me take a look at, there has to be something else going on.
Yeah.
And then I started having the same complaints myself when I had 2 kids, coming out of medical school and residency. And then I started having my own family and these extra responsibilities with my medical practice. And when I burned out, that's when the rubber really hit the road. I really had to make a determination about how do I come out of this chronic fatigue, unhappiness, all of those symptoms that go when you get to that point of not just sleep deprivation, but rest deprivation.
This is so interesting because one of the things we want to talk about, and I'm not going to ask you this question right now because somewhere during this discussion, I want to make sure we talk about, from your perspective, adrenal fatigue, because it's a topic that's thrown around so much. Mm-hmm. And, it's one of those things that people have so many different ideas about. Of course, there have been a number of books written about it. But let's start with where you actually are right now, the whole concept of rest, recovery, and how biochemistry led you into that. What's the connection? Where did all that start?
Well, I initially started thinking that sleep and rest were the same thing. And I think that's a misconception that a lot of us have, is that if I get more sleep, then that will solve my fatigue issues. And unless your main issue is solely sleep deprivation, that's not going to work, because the problem isn't just in getting more hours of sleep, it's in getting higher quality sleep. And that higher quality sleep really comes when our body is able to go into a fully rested stage, is able to go through all of the 5 levels and stages of sleep, from 1 through stage 4 of non-REM and then into the stage 5 of REM sleep. So when I'm looking at that and I was thinking about, okay, so sleeping more is not going to help. How do I help get people into a deeper level of sleep? And it can't just come from right before going to bed, trying to do some type of little quick activity, because we get our bodies so wound up throughout the day with our day-to-day activities. We have to have a process to kind of undo some of that damage just naturally as part of our lifestyle throughout the day. And that's really where the rest part comes in. It's just learning how to apply restful techniques in a natural way in your day-to-day activity so that you don't end up at the end of the day stressed out, tired, fatigued, and in pain.
This is going to be an interesting conversation, folks. I mean, is there anybody that's listening to this that hasn't had this problem? I mean, first of all, we have a really bright audience, Sandra. They're just a great group of folks. Mm-hmm. And they're so enthusiastic about the great individuals that we have talking to us. But you have a nuanced approach that is already, just the very fact that you're spelling it out like this puts us in a completely different league, because it's so ubiquitous if you think about it. I mean, the idea of the only solution for so many of us is write a prescription. And I think you're really saying, hey, folks, there is one heck of a lot more than just writing a prescription. So let's start by talking a little bit about some of the nuances of what you suggest would be, for example, the preparation to get us into that sleeping process and restorative process that's necessary.
Well, for me, it starts with looking at kind of rest as the big picture. We can't lump all rest as one thing. So when I started looking at it, there's different types of rest. And so there's 7 types that I pulled out when I started researching and looking at it. And those are physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, social, sensory, and creative. And so when I'm looking at them with someone and they say I'm tired all the time, one of the things I start asking them, well, what kind of tired are you? Because are you physically tired, emotionally tired, mentally tired? We have to kind of figure out what type of tired they are, because usually someone's life isn't out of balance in all 7 of these areas. There's normally 1 or 2 things. I kind of look at it like if we're testing someone, you mentioned testing for vitamins and different chemicals. If we're testing someone for a vitamin deficiency, they're probably not deficient in everything. But one core vitamin being off, let's say vitamin D or something, or B12, can really make a huge difference in how that body feels. Well, it's the same with rest. One specific rest deficit being severely off can hugely impact your life in every area, but every area is not broken.
That is so interesting. So then the issue is really having the perceptions of the options, the varieties of the rest experience, so you can ask the question correctly. Because if you just ask about rest, just what I did with you, it's way too innocent. You're really talking about a much deeper perception of the varieties of challenges that can occur. And that's all spelled out in your book.
It is. And I find that most people need help kind of identifying which type of rest they're most deficit in. So with my patients, I use a free resource on my website at restquiz.com. And they can go in and do a comprehensive assessment. And it quickly just kind of spells out to them which type of rest they're most deficient in. So that's how I help them to kind of pinpoint it. Because until they can recognize, oh, this is the one or two that I'm having the biggest problem with, they tend to kind of look at the big picture and think, oh, I just need to take a vacation. And as we know, vacations usually are not restful.
Yeah, there are a couple movies about that. Now, let's clarify this for the listeners, because you said it, but I want to make sure everybody hears it. It's http://restquiz, restquiz.com.
That's correct.
And that's where a person can get that breakdown. I need to run over and do that right away. Not that I ever have this problem, of course.
Of course not.
So then let's just break it down a little bit and give a couple of examples that are some of the most commonplace examples where you see people coming to you confused, not really clear on what they need to do. It's like, oh my gosh, here it is again. I see this all the time.
Well, I have a lot of patients who are very high achievers. They have very high pressure jobs and lives. And so they automatically think it's just the stress of their job that's causing them to feel tired all the time. And when we kind of get more into the specifics of it, what we find is that they really have more of what we call an emotional rest deficit. In other words, their careers, let's say if they're, I'll just use myself as an example. As a physician, when I show up at the ICU, there's a certain persona and personality and behavior that is expected of me. So you're on performance, whether you think about it or not, because it's expected. And so there's pressure that goes with that. And it's no different from, I had a homeschooling mom when I was discussing this at a facility who said, well, don't leave us out. There's pressures between homeschooling moms and soccer moms to act and look and be a certain way. Mm-hmm. So it's global. We all have these kind of people-pleasing behaviors that we have when we try to show up the way we think people want to see us. And there's an emotional pressure that goes with that, a performance pressure. And what happens is when your job is built around that, a lot of us leave those situations and take that same behavior home with us. So we carry on the same persona in the times when we should be resting. And so it ends up emotionally fatiguing us. And we have to have those times when we are able to let our guard down, to be able to express our feelings and to be kind of authentic and raw with those who we know, understand, and get us.
Well, that is so true. I mean, just thinking, even when we visit relatives, they can be family members. And you think, hey, we're going to go bond on childhood or something like that. But then you have a whole array of expectations and what are we going to do and how do we negotiate what we're going to do and all those things. I mean, the same thing can even happen in very familiar territory, I would think.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. When we're constantly under that type of emotional pressure, it's draining on us. And that's when we start having people who look like they have the perfect life, but they say, I don't feel fulfilled. I don't feel understood. I don't feel like I'm able to just be myself. There has to be people in our lives, and we have to prioritize those people where we feel comfortable just really being who we are without the pretense and without all the extra baggage.
Well, now, are there specific treatment modalities for each one of these types of experiences requiring rest? I mean, is there, like, for example, you were talking right now about emotional challenges, and then I heard you run by cognitive. I thought that was very interesting. And you also talked about creative.
Yeah.
So those seem to be a little more nuanced than emotional, which is a perception that so many of us could easily identify with, but creativity, rest, and then what one does about it. So let's start with the emotional. What's the prescription? How can you tell us a little bit about what you would recommend for emotional rest, for example?
Well, for someone who's struggling with emotional rest, what I have them first do is identify those people who drain them and those people who are life-giving to them. So a lot of times we don't segment people like that, but we know that when we leave some people's presence, they have a negative effect on us. And so you have to be able to recognize when that's happening so that when you feel that, you don't take that feeling from having that negative experience into those life-giving relationships and bring them down. We see it a lot of times when people leave very stressful jobs and they go home and they're, lashing out at their spouse and their kids because they have not dealt with that issue in the moment of that negative energy going on with that person who ticked them off in the first place. So it ends up coming into their personal lives. But it's acknowledging that. We have to be able to recognize when someone's having a toxic effect on us so that we can then purposely replete whatever that person took from us. If they made us feel shame, insignificant, inferior, whatever it was that brought you down, acknowledge that, get past it so that you don't take that baggage into your next moments with the people you love.
That is so interesting. Now a quick leap into the nuance. What about the creative exhaustion? Now, I would think, I'm just talking off the top of my head because I really don't know where you're going to go with this. We haven't talked about it, but one would think that the creative exhaustion experience would be more often than not a relationship with oneself, because so often if a person's being creative, writing a book, putting a paper down, doing a PowerPoint presentation, that it's really their relationship with themselves, I'm guessing. Now, then if that, first of all, is that true? And then secondly, if it isn't true or it is true, what does one do about it?
Well, I think that's an awesome way to think about it. The creative rest is the experience of allowing beauty to inspire us and to liberate wonder. So you do have to have a bit of understanding about what does that for you, what liberates wonder and awe inside of you. And that's different for each one of us. There's some studies that are out that I discussed in Sacred Rest where they mentioned how some people, when they're around water or mountains or the beach and these different places, how when they took MRI images, that there was actually changes that they saw, that these beautiful scenes and natural scenes actually had a tangible effect on how they felt, on the chemicals in their body. And so for most of us, when we think about what we feel when we get around beauty, we don't allow it to do something inside of us. And that's the rest part of it. Now, a lot of us may have had experiences where we went to like an art museum or a symphony or some beautiful music was playing and you felt great. The music actually did something. You could tell there was something that was happening just in admiring that beauty. That's what we have to start recognizing, that is not just an extra thing we do on the side. Beauty and experiencing beauty and allow beauty to awaken something inside of us should be a daily experience, because that's what makes life great. That's what makes it fun and worth living.
That is so interesting, because then what happens is you're actually delineating for yourself what a goal is in regards to that reality in your life. You know, how you can actually use it effectively to grow as opposed to being stuck, overwhelmed, or confused.
Absolutely. It's a healing that comes naturally just by going deeper into who you are, what you want, what you love.
That is so interesting. So then when you break down through the quiz what a person's arrests are, or they're arrested in their rest, then you have a prescription really for each one of them in your book.
There are. I give examples because really it's individualized. What works for one person may not work for someone else. So for each type of rest, I try to give 2 or at least 3 different examples of things they can do. Most of the time what I find is because our personalities and our backgrounds and our lifestyles are all so different, it's not kind of a one size fit all. Rest is very individualized. For instance, for me, part of my emotional rest is in my writing. But for someone who doesn't like writing, that's a chore. They would be exhausted trying to write, 50,000 words. But for me, that's restful. Over the process, obviously I don't do it all at one time, but over the process, there's a lot of healing and processing that happens in that. And so that actually restores me. And I think that's probably one of the key things that I try to teach my patients is that anything that you call rest should end in some type of restoration in your life. If whatever you're calling rest doesn't revive, restore, or replete something in you, then it's just work camouflaged in a different way.
Sandra, that's so true. And on a personal note, that's exactly what happens to me. First of all, interviewing folks like you is a lot of fun. I grow from every experience, but where I really have the fun is getting the show notes together on CoreBrain Journal, because I really chase down some kind of a picture, photograph, JPEG, that's going to embrace the message. And that very frequently is some kind of a natural, has something to do with the humanity of the conversation, or the transcendent measure of the conversation. And it is very gratifying. I mean, I tell my wife, I just love doing this because it's so much fun getting it together. And when I hit that publish button and it goes out there, it's just very gratifying because I feel like I've done something, and it's only me really messing around with my computer, getting it out to the folks that are listeners. It's pretty interesting.
And that's the thing. I think oftentimes we try to make rest fit into kind of this idealistic bubble of what we think rest looks like. For some people, when I say rest, they start getting these images of laying out on a blanket, staring at a piece of grass or something. That's not restful for me. That would stress me out.
Yeah.
You know, each one of us has our own idea, but if it's restoring something in us, because if it's restoring something in us, then we leave those moments better than how we entered in. And that's really what rest is supposed to do.
I like that restorative idea. It's a terrific idea. Now, what we're going to do is take a break here, and I'm going to ask you this penetrating question because I want to tap your medical brain a little bit on this whole thing, and I'm open to any feedback that you have about it because, and I know our listeners are, because if you're talking about rest, exhaustion, tiredness, one of the things that comes up for so many in functional medicine is this whole thing of adrenal fatigue and what it means. So what I'm going to ask you when we get back is your opinion about the whole concept of adrenal fatigue and how does it fit in with the concept of what you're talking about, sacred rest, and where we can go with that. So, folks, we'll be back in just a moment. Today, the world of mind science, psychiatry, and mental health is rapidly changing with innovative, comprehensive testing that takes both patients and practitioners into a new world of measured details with useful, understandable, and remarkably actionable plans. The key phrase here is cost-effective. Testing also introduces a key parallel word, predictability. Psychiatric treatment failure, especially after multiple medications and or brief hospitalizations, arises directly from the complexity of measurable brain-body imbalances and impediments that explicitly interfere with medical outcomes and create costly difficulties with inadequately informed supplement and medication trials over time. Great Plains provides a leadership team of biomedical experts with advanced laboratory insights, approved nationally both by the FDA and CLIA laboratory certifications, and is available internationally for both public and medical professionals. Great Plains Laboratory is the primary laboratory we've used at CoreSite for years with excellent customer service for both patients and medical colleagues. They are on the spot. They get it every time. In addition, they provide exemplary training modules, which are webinars and conferences, in an effort to broaden practice perspectives wherever you live. Do follow up on one of these complimentary test offers today at http://greatplainslaboratory.com/CBJ. Yeah, that's CoreBrain Journal CBJ. Well, welcome back, folks. Here we are again, and we have Dr. Sandra DaltonSmith, and she's really entertaining us in a way and also edifying us at the same time with a completely transformational conversation that has to do with ways that we can grow ourselves individually in our own life experience by really understanding what the heck it is that's going on with us in the first place. Instead of dreaming around and looking at some of these concepts globally, we can get more precise about what we're doing with ourselves in terms of our own rehab, in terms of how we can reconstruct our lives in some effective way. So, Sandra, the question I've been busting to ask you a little bit is this whole thing of adrenal fatigue. Now, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm sure that you have some awareness of it because you're a medical practitioner and you're talking about rest. And I'd like to just hear any of your feedback on that, either, first of all, your feedback on a global way about adrenal fatigue, and then referential to your book if there's some connection.
Well, definitely there is. I agree with you. You really can't talk about fatigue in general and how people feel chronically tired without addressing the issue of adrenal fatigue to some degree. I think the problem is the reason I think so many doctors kind of balk at the whole adrenal fatigue mindset is because really the treatment for it doesn't come in a pill. The treatment for what we describe as adrenal fatigue comes in behavioral training. And that really is what Sacred Rest is talking about. It's a mindset change, a behavioral or cultural type change in how we use our bodies, both for work and for rest. And that ratio that is required for optimal performance and benefit. You know, with adrenal fatigue, really it's a mindset that the body is constantly releasing excessive cortisol, But why would it do that? We do that in times of stress. That is our stress hormone. So if our lives are chronically in a stress state, then we're going to be releasing more. But why is it in a stress state? Because it's not getting replenished. So you're kind of grinding it out. You're pushing our bodies beyond what they're supposed to be doing. My cell phone has a maximum battery life. When it gets down to 20%, there's this red thing that pops up and says, warning, low battery, charge me back up.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, our bodies don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
It'll keep pushing and grinding and cranking it out, and it'll just input the extra stress hormones to kind of keep it going. And what we do with rest is we start allowing ourselves natural ways to decrease those stress hormones, natural ways to get them back down to healthy levels, so we're not having the side effects from them.
So good. Now, let me ask you this as a medical practitioner, because what's your opinion about using adrenal testing? I've had some mileage with this because a person will say, well, first of all, I have not come anywhere near your knowledge on it, so you're edifying me in different ways that I can deal with it. But coming at it, this question from the perspective of an innocent compared to where you are, I've used adrenal testing to say, here in graphic terms is what your adrenal gland is doing morning, noon, afternoon, and night. You can actually see what's going on. What's your thought about that in terms of what you're talking about? Do you routinely test, or you feel like, hey, I don't do it unless there's really a medical consternation going on?
Well, the thing is, for me, I'm still working what I call a traditional medical practice. So for the most part, if the insurance is not going to cover it, it's going to be an issue because patients don't want to pay for it.
Yeah.
Whereas in kind of more of a concierge type situation, if I'm able to get my patients to understand that there are tests that I think are beneficial, but I honestly can't get your insurance to actually cover them and have them be willing to. In an ideal situation for me, I would love to do the testing because I think it's helpful to see some solid data. Mm-hmm. And I think most of us, we really, it's no different than when I have someone with elevated blood pressure. I can look at them and tell them your cholesterol or blood pressure is probably high because your body mass index is pretty up there. But, when I get the hard data in front of them, then there's nothing, they can't turn away from it. They have to acknowledge it. Mm-hmm. And I think for some of us who have very high pressure jobs or we live very stressed lives, that having that testing to be able to see that, yes, this is an issue. You are maxing out your adrenal glands. You are living a very high stress life and your body is reflecting that, is responding to that high level of stress, would help them to make these changes. Because people who are overachievers and the ones who tend to be very high stress or very anxious type personalities, they're not ones to easily let go of their time to allow themselves the rest they need.
That is so true. So true. Never happened to me, of course.
The more controlling or fearful we are or driven we are, all of those qualities, none of them are bad. All of them have their place. But when they kind of take precedence in our lives and they become the forefront of our thought processes, it really can put you on a kind of a roller coaster ride with your adrenal glands because you end up straining them beyond their capacity.
It's funny to me because I've done presentations on this before as an innocent. I know a little bit about it. I've done testing for adrenal, but in my attempts to edify my medical colleagues, exactly what you said is true. They're like, hey, it's snake oil. This is ridiculous. It doesn't matter. It's like, and it's amazing, even if you have good laboratory data that shows a malfunctioning adrenal or a compromised adrenal, it doesn't have to be malfunctioning. The quick thing is, do we need to give them cortisol or not? And then there's so many other things that can be done short of cortisol. This is what you're saying, short of a hardcore medical intervention that could be helpful and actually restore that adrenal function.
Yes, that's always my thought process. When I went into medicine as a physician, my initial goal was never to be people's pill pusher. Mm-hmm. That's not what I went into it for. I really wanted to be more in the preventative teaching, kind of showing you how to use the body God gave you to the best of its ability so that it can do what it's designed to do. And, unfortunately, medicine is not necessarily set up like that. 15-minute appointments don't lend themselves to teaching. Yeah. It lends themselves to get in, get out. So it is a mindset change for physicians. And I agree with you. A lot of doctors do kind of take a bit of the easy road because it's much easier to write a pill. I can hit print on that electronic prescriber and pop a pill in someone within seconds. Whereas trying to explain this and have them go through the quiz and all of that takes time.
Well, and you having this available is so constructive because then a person could just say, go look at this. Take a look at this material. You don't have to, and it's so self-sufficient. I mean, a person can come in and say, well, let me identify what my problem is and let me go do something about it in addition to whatever I'm doing medically and how I can get myself back together. Now, let me ask you another question. Where are you? Now, first of all, I have to tell you quite honestly, I'm very sensitive about the word holistic. I always like Dr. Mark Hyman, who's the chairman of the Institute of Functional Medicine. And he says, yeah, well, you could say that I'm holistic because everybody that comes to me does come with a whole list.
That's good.
I always like that one. And that's so true for me, and I'm sure it is for you because of what your practice is. But I don't like the word holistic because it puts you in a camp that is only one way of looking at it, just as traditional medicine is only one way of looking at the solution. You know, my feeling is where we need to go as medical practitioners and where the public needs to go is comprehensive medicine, which is what you're talking about.
Absolutely. That is so true.
And if you're going to think comprehensively, then there are an array of things, but all of us like to think reductionistically in a kind of reptilian way, you know, do or die. It's because we're evolving, really, our whole medical practice is evolving from an acute practice scenario, live or die. And we're so much more aware, as you are very well aware, Dr. Dalton-Smith, about chronic illness. And chronic illness is not a do or die. There's no acuity to it. The issue is you have to look at the nuances and think comprehensively if you're going to do anything because it's nuance related. It's not in your face. So you have to chase it down a little bit. So anyway, let me ask you the question. The issue is, what do you think about some of the other things that happen? And do you routinely prescribe other things like, for example, I could imagine that exercise could go both ways for a person who is having a problem with not resting, going out and just running themselves into the ground. And then meditation. I'd be interested in your thoughts about exercise and meditation, if you would, please.
Yes, you mentioned about comprehensive health, and I think that's so important with chronic disease, as you mentioned, because, you know, so many of the chronic diseases that we see, as more and more studies are coming out, it's talking about the inflammatory response and the inflammatory response process and everything from strokes to dementia to heart disease, and you name it, everything now seems to have an inflammatory connection with it. And part of the things that you're mentioning, like the physical rest activities or mental rest activities, that's the whole issue, the whole benefit of them is that as we kind of de-stress our bodies, we do decrease that inflammation process. And then obviously there's dietary changes that need to go into place with that too, with watching our carbohydrates and those kind of things that kind of feed the process. But I think one thing that I highly recommend with physical rest, because so many of the people who come into my practice, they complain of back pain, neck pain, headache, everything aches kind of syndrome, to start doing those passive, I should say, and active physical rest activities that improve their body tone. Say, for instance, with active physical rest, we're talking about things like yoga or stretching or gentle walking, not necessarily running a marathon, but doing things where you're increasing your circulation in a non-stressful way. Your breathing is even, you're not panting, but you're allowing your blood to increase, you're allowing your oxygen level to increase. So you're having restoration happen inside of your body just by the mechanism of getting better blood flow and better oxygenation. And then with meditation, mental rest is where I put meditation into play at, because it's really trying to make sure that we don't allow negative thoughts to predominate our mental space. And that when there are things that we are holding on to that we need to release, that we do the things necessary to do that, whether that's journaling or what we call brain dumping, kind of writing it out on a piece of paper before you go to bed, but you're actively participating in those things. And we're addressing those thoughts that hit us before we try to get in bed to go to sleep, because that's why so often when people lay down, they say, oh, well, I can't go to sleep because my mind's racing. Well, it's racing because you never gave it an opportunity any other time during the day to process.
So true. And you really were brushing up against one point there, and you started to talk about the negatives. And then the issue is, what do you do with the negatives? And there are different things that one can do with the negatives. We've had a person quite recently before this episode talk about the Course in Miracles and a kind of spiritual transformational process where an individual then develops an affirmative view of their connections, their life, and where they are, as opposed to a negative logical view, more of an affirmative, more comprehensive view. I mean, I hate to use the word again. I'm using, now it's going to become a cliche, but the bottom line is thinking about things more completely as opposed to thinking about it, okay, there's a problem, and really looking at an internal affirmation that can occur to help with the negative. So you would be interested in that one as well. She's a very interesting person.
I do agree. That's actually one of the tips that I put in the book was about positive affirmations, because with the mental part, if there's something that you're continually telling yourself about yourself that is not fact, but is just a label that you've allowed to attach to you, then you can unattach it and put a new mindset around it. And by thinking of what is the hope-filled version of this, is how I put it. So to come up with a hope-filled version of it and allow that to be where your mind goes to rather than the negative.
So let's talk more about your practice. What could one do if they wanted to consult with you? Do you consult with people virtually, long distance? Do they have to come to Alabama? How does all that work?
It depends on if it's an individual or a corporation. I do have a lot of corporate wellness training within facilities to help them get their employees at a place of better health so that they can be more productive and happier in their careers. And then for those who are looking for more kind of a one-on-one approach, I have some classes that I do that have a very in-depth kind of process of taking them through this rest journey to help them be able to see how they can get more rest in their life. And that's all on my website at ichoosemybestlife.com.
Okay, so it sounds great. So I'm going to say it one more time. ichoosemybestlife.com. And that's going to be easy. So there's restquiz.com and ichoosemybestlife.com. What's really cool about Dr. Dalton-Smith is she's really putting out there for you folks some hard tools, some things you can look at that will change your view of really stress is a completely ubiquitous term that has so many broad applications, but she's really breaking it down so you know what the stress is, what your actual problem is, and what you can do more constructively about it. So I thank you very much, Sandra, for coming on board and sharing all this great information. Anything else as we close, you think, hey, Parker, I just want to mention this one other thing. Anything else that you think is something we should have talked about?
My closing statement would probably just be this, to just stop looking at rest as kind of that book on the bookshelf you'll get at when you have time. A lot of times we'll say we'll rest when we have time. You have to make time for rest. It has to become a priority if you really want to live your best life.
I like that. It's great. It's like build it into your system. You got work, you got family, you got visits, build rest into your system. I have to tell you, my son and his wife and family are much better about that than I am. I'll tell you that. I see what's going on with my dad. I can't do this to myself. It's wild. So thank you so much, Sandra, for coming on board. Really appreciate it. If you have something else that you think down the road that you would like to share with our audience, we'd be more than happy to have you come back. This is very edifying, very useful. And I love the word utilitarian. This is a utilitarian interview with a lot of practical applications. So thank you very much for coming on board.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to CoreBrain Journal. We're working every day behind the scenes to bring you reports that connect research benches with those street trenches. Here we share the complexity of mind science because, as you know, details really do matter. One of the most pervasive, misunderstood challenges is how commonplace medications like those written for ADHD, are used so regularly without clear guidelines. If you think you'd like more specifics, take a minute to download my 2-page PDF packed with video links and references on the absolute essentials of how to start
ADHD medications. They're easily available at CoreBrainJournal.com/start. Thanks for listening. Do connect and stay tuned. Together we can make a difference.